have the luxury of fighting our wars as away games rather than as the occupation of our own country. And that means you have to do it in partnership. And for the war to be successful, think back to Clausewitz, it's politics by other means. For the war to be successful, you have to be able to have allies to shape the conflict, and you have to have a legitimate local government capable of ruling. Ted Williams hit 4 balls out of 10 and is the best hitter in the history of baseball. The United States gets about 2 out of 10 right in the wars that we fight across the 20th century. And what tends to make Americans care to go out into the world is actually values, not national interests. Because the United States, after the conquest of the American West, so actually we genuinely become an imperial power in the Indian Wars, not in foreign wars. Once the United States is a continent-spanning country, we have won the geopolitical lottery because we have great neighbors in Mexico and Canada, and we have oceans. So we have an enormously wide margin of error. And you see it play out in the occasional cyclical practice of Americans being exhausted with having to care about the rest of the world and wanting to pull in our activities and let the rest of the world take care of itself. The problem with that approach is that, especially after World War II, it is much cheaper and easier to sustain a beneficial order than it is to have to claw back your own security and the security of other countries you care about. So the sort of pivot point, the end of America as an imperial power, begins with World War I, right? President Wilson campaigns in 1916 against American involvement in World War I, right? He's out on the campaign trail saying, I am the candidate that will keep us out of this pointless, bloody warfare. And he changes his mind when the war at sea, so Britain has a quarantine, a blockade of goods going to Europe, which is very damaging to the economy of the United States. And Germany has a submarine campaign of sinking ships in order to try and break the blockade. And that's how the United States gets drawn in. But in order to persuade the American public that what makes sense as a national security move and as an economic move, President Wilson outlines his 14 points. That about 10 of them are very much about the politics of a post-war settlement in Europe, what the Russians can do, what the Germans will have. But the most important of the 14 points, because they are the projection into the international order of our domestic political order, are self-determination, free trade, and the sovereignty of people to choose their own government. That is anathema, not only to the adversaries we end up fighting in World War I, but to the allies we choose to fight with, the great imperial powers of France and Britain and Russia, all of whom are empires. The reason I think Wilson's 14 points is the thing to remember about World War I, and it is, of course, a failure, right? The United States does not have the power, either during the war or subsequent to it in the Versailles peace negotiations, to make the 14 points the basis of the post-war settlement. right? So despite the fact that we are the country that provides the money, the food, the weapons, and the soldiers to break the stalemate of World War I, we are not powerful enough to set the terms of the peace. So, but what is so important, the reason I think Wilson's 14 points are the inflection point of who America becomes as the dominant power in the order, is because no country can sustain a strategy that is fundamentally inconsistent with who they are as a political culture. And because of who we are as a free people, as a democratic people, even as a religious people, the United States is a very uncomfortable imperial power, and we're a very uncomfortable dominant power in the international order.